Are you a Jesus-loving woman who overexercises and deprives herself of food, desperately trying to obtain a goal weight on the scale? And yet, at the same time, you strive to be a healthy version of yourself by eating well and feeling fit? Hi, I'm Andrea, and I was running on the same hamster wheel for over 20 years. My toxic body image and eating disorder stole my joy and self-respect. Thankfully, God was always with me, fighting my battles and blessing me with the grit to reclaim my life. I'm off the hamster wheel, but I see you still stuck in the cage, and I want to help free you too. Journey with me every week. I'll share personal stories, tools, mindset shifts, and the practical steps I took to heal my unhealthy relationship with food and exercise. I don't believe food and exercise are the problems. I believe they're part of the solution. Instead, I'll teach you how your mindset and faith are the keys to healing. Get ready to navigate your newfound path to healing. Get ready to reclaim your self-worth. Get ready to realign with your God-given identity. For in this identity is where you find true wellness and healing. When you are well, your gifts shine into the world. Shine on, babe. Let's do this. I'm Andrea Carroll, and this is Good Vanilla. Hey, pretty peeps. I'm quickly popping in here before we get rolling to communicate that I am not giving medical advice. I'm giving energetic, emotional, and mental support for women on their health journeys. I'm here because I care. I hope sharing my story will in some way help you on your unique path. Okay, let's dive in. Hey everyone, thank you for being here and hanging out with me today. Over the next few weeks, I think it's going to be about the next 3 episodes, this one included, I want to talk about triggers. And I think it's an important topic. It's something that we have to do a lot of work around, okay? We have to be aware of the impact and the presence of triggers in our lives. But first off, before I kind of dive into this a little bit, if triggers are kind of new to you or you've heard about them and you're not quite sure exactly if you've ever experienced a trigger before or exactly what it is, I kind of just want to address triggers and kind of how they form and some of those basic things, because knowing what they are and how they form, it will actually help you identify them, I think. That's how it's worked for me. And then the key step in identifying them is how you can then work through them. And that is the most important thing, because I will share this, I don't think it's next week, but I think the following week, I am going to share about how triggers have kind of blindsided me lately. And I consider myself pretty far along in my healing journey with my eating disorder. And I have been kind of taken aback by the impact that some triggers have had on me. I was not expecting it at all. So I will be sharing that later on. But first, like I said, to give you a little bit or a little bit of foundation on triggers, just so that you kind of know where I'm coming from. But basically, when I was reading about triggers before I recorded this episode, and some of the things I found, they say that the word triggers the word trigger has been used more casually in our language. And it makes sense, because you hear it everywhere. I mean, you go on Instagram and on posts and on Facebook and wherever else, even on ads on TV, they'll have trigger warnings, and it just kind of seems like the sensitivity around triggers, it's everywhere, and everyone's being alerted about something. But here's the truth. Like, a trigger is more than something that just makes you uncomfortable or upset. Like, some people think that they're triggered, like if they get angry about something or if they're just uncomfortable, then that's a trigger. But in all actuality, triggers go deeper. They're tied to mental health conditions. So, like an eating disorder, ADHD, PTSD, even OCD, personality disorders. There's all kinds of them out there. But so it's more involved than just saying, oh yeah, I was so triggered because that made me really mad and upset. Yeah, so like a mental health disorder, even like anxiety disorders, addictions, depression, bipolar, personality disorders. There's if you research mental health conditions, you will learn a lot about yourself. I would suppose, because that's what happened to me. But with triggers, it is something that is a stimulus. It's a stimulus that evokes a painful memory. And the stimulus is it's a sensory reminder. Like, they are sensory reminders related to the traumatic event. So it could be anything like lights and sounds and smells, and these stimulus, they elicit the anxiety and the panic that you felt during that traumatic event. So whenever you encounter a stimulus that was at that traumatic event, when you encounter that later on, then it like reawakens and it worsens your symptoms around that traumatic event. And that's like the trigger. And then you'll have like that anxiety and that panic, that heart racing, or that like breakdown. But that there's more to triggers than I think the most people understand, because we use the word so casually. And also like knowing how triggers form. Okay, so how does a trigger form? So a traumatic event happens, an experience happens, and when that traumatic event happens, and here's the thing about traumatic events also, it is relative. And it really is just based on your perception. It has to do like with your genetic makeup, because how you respond to an event can be different than how someone else responds to an event. So something could be terribly traumatic for one person, and then there's this other person that was there at this event, and they might not have any trauma from it just because of their genetic makeup and just kind of how they perceive things. It's kind of all relative to perception and how you perceive an event and how you internalize it. Okay? So if you view something as a traumatic experience, what happens in that moment is your brain, it stores the surrounding stimulus. Our brain does this because its primary job is to protect you. It is to make sure you survive, and if you encounter a traumatic event, it remembers all the surrounding stimuli, so that the next time that you would encounter the same stimuli, it's almost like a warning system, and it's to protect you from pain and to keep you safe. So then whenever you come across the same stimuli again, you're reminded of that traumatic event. And it's your brain's job to keep you safe. So of course, it's going to say, hey, remember what happened last time? When XYZ happened, or you experienced this, something bad happened. So be aware, get prepared, because something bad might happen again. If triggers are a problem for you, it is important to connect the stimuli to the details of the traumatic event, because then later this can help you later understand why you have such a strong emotional or physical response to that stimulus. So like I had said earlier, it's good to know what a trigger is and how they form and how to identify them, because it does help in understanding them and how to like heal from them. I'm going to give you a couple of examples from my own life. And I hope by doing that, then maybe you can kind of see where your triggers may be coming from, or start to identify some that you may be dealing with. And just to give them as a reference and just kind of how it works. So I had shared in a previous episode about my dad's heart attack. And I shared the story about how I stood on the street and I could hear the ambulance sirens. And I was standing there waiting and wondering if the emergency response team would make it in time. Because as I stood there and I listened to the sirens, there were times, it would sound like it'd be on our street, but you know how sound carries, it's just crazy how it sounds like it's closer and then it sounds further away. So it really played with my mind a lot. But as I stood there and listened for I listened to these sirens, these ambulance sirens and the police sirens and the sirens from the fire trucks, because eventually all three came. First the police came and they had their siren going. So there were a lot of sirens that day. And then there was the ambulance and the fire trucks. I actually think it was the policeman first, and then the fire truck got there, and then the ambulance got there. Okay? And so there were all kinds of sirens, and I'm standing there listening to this, knowing or wondering if my dad was going to live. So, traumatic experience, big time. And the sirens were at the center of it. And for so many years after that day, whenever I would hear sirens, I would relive. I would immediately be transported back to my front yard, or standing right next to the street. I remember what I wore. I remember the time of day. Like, I remember where the sun was. Like, I'm standing there and I can feel it. And it'd be so hard. So, cause every time I would hear sirens years later, I'd kind of just shut down. Like, my breath would get caught in my chest. And I would just, that pain and that fear of that day, that worry about my dad and whether or not he was going to live. If I had to go forward, be 17 and going and like just standing there thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to do without him? What's my mom, my brother and I, what are we going to do without him? And just reliving all of that. It was terrible. So that is a perfect example of a trigger. That is like the stimulus was the sound of the sirens. Like I said, I even remember what I was wearing that day. But the main thing that my brain stored in that traumatic event was the sound of the sirens. So it took me time to work through that. But that's the first example I want to share. A second example is something more recent. It just happened over the last couple months. My daughters and I, my daughter just turned 9 today at the time of recording this. Today is actually her birthday. She turned 9. So happy birthday, Ava. But at the time that this trigger event happened, she was 8. And I have a 4-year-old, Adeline. and we were driving to an appointment, to a doctor's appointment. And they were hungry and they needed a snack. So they opened up, I don't know, it was something in a bag, some kind of cracker thing in a bag. And they are sitting in the back seat eating these crackers. And it was probably like, we were just kind of going, you get in those cycles of just eating processed food on the run sometimes, especially as parents. So they're probably on like their fifth snack or food from a bag that day. And it kind of, it triggered me. All of a sudden I started panicking, and I felt my heart start racing because they were sitting in the back seat, kind of just getting all excited, like, oh, this is so great, like eating these snacks, this is what I want to eat, like their excitement over it. And I started lecturing them about how this is not something we can always do because it's not healthy, it's not what our body, it's not good for our bodies to take in this food. And I was losing it. Thankfully, we actually parked. We found a parking spot, and I shut off the car. And I had to sit there and take these deep breaths in. And I wasn't even feeling lightheaded. And like I said, my heart rate was like I was getting really excited. Like my heart was racing. I was kind of lightheaded, and I just felt like this rush of panic coursing through me. And it was almost like this out-of-body experience too. And we're getting out of the car and we're walking into the doctor's office, and they're looking at me and with worried expressions on their faces, wondering if I'm okay. And I had to think to myself, what is going on? Why am I losing it over a bag, like over these snapped crackers or whatever they were? I don't even know. And then it hit me. It's because I was exposed to so much processed food. And I think I explained this in an earlier episode. If I haven't, or if you haven't listened to it, basically with my dad's heart attack, I equated food as I had already been in my eating disorder for a couple years, and then my dad had his heart attack. So prior to the heart attack, I thought food was the enemy. Like food makes me fat. Like I eat food, I'm gonna get fat. So that was how I viewed food. And then once my dad had his heart attack, it went from fear of food to thinking food was going to kill me. And I connected like processed foods to that type of fear. Like anything processed, it evoked a stronger reaction. Like that fear was so much stronger. And so I still deal with the food, like the food fear there. Like it's subsided a lot, but I was triggered by the processed food and just kind of like their excitement over it and the number of things that they had been eating. It was just one of, like I said, we were on like a few days of just running and being crazy. So I was seeing it a lot more. Like I was seeing them consume this, and just my past experience of what I equated it. Because at that time when I was really struggling, I called that bad food. Like there was no neutrality with food. I viewed it as bad. And whenever there is a lot going on in my life and I feel busy and kind of running from one event to the next, anxiety sets in, and then I grasp for control. And I felt like I was losing control because of the food that I was surrounded with, and that seeing my girls eat that. it was kind of like it was kind of like proof, like, uh-oh, look at this. You don't have control over this situation. Like you're letting this back into your life. And remember, like the big bad food in the bags, and it was just, I really blew it out of proportion, and I kind of scared them a little bit because they were worried, because I like I said, I was breathing heavier and my heart was racing. And by the time we got inside, I made this connection, like I just explained. I realized, oh my gosh, this got me again. I was triggered by the food that I associated as bad and that will clog your arteries and give you a heart attack and leave your child standing on the boulevard waiting for the emergency response team, and she's going to wonder if they're ever going to make it. Like so it's almost like those sirens, those dang sirens. I was triggered again by this food, and like I could like feel it and see it. It's almost like when I watch them eating it, I'm like, it's almost like I can see it like clogging up their little beautiful arteries, I'm just like, and that's not true, and that's not what's happening. But because of the traumatic event, because of that experience I have had with my eating disorder around food, and then it getting heightened and worsened by my dad's heart attack, this triggering moment with my girls, and just having them eating so much more processed food over a couple of days, I just kept internalizing, and then all of a sudden I just exploded, and I had a meltdown, and yeah, it was a total trigger moment. So that's another example of how these triggers just kind of wiggle their ways into our lives. So that is a way. I just want to highlight the significance of it and the importance of understanding them and starting to identify them in your life. Because here are the things. Triggers can happen to the best of us. And when my triggers blindsided me, like with the sirens and the food, it was a humbling experience, and I was reminded that I still have lots to learn and many opportunities for growth. And with my girls specifically, I use them as teaching moments. So when the processed food triggered me, it was a teaching opportunity. Because my daughters can view me as superwoman sometimes. And then in that moment when I was kind of unraveling and I had them worried and they were looking at me like, are you okay? They got to see that even their heroes need help sometimes, right? And that it's healthy to be vulnerable. And I connected with them, and it was a great teaching moment. I told them, hey guys, I'm really sorry that really triggered me back there, and I explained why. The 4-year-old, did she understand? Probably not. But the 8-year-old, yes. I could tell by her face. And we just kind of hugged and was like, okay, this is okay. So they not only impact your life, they impact those around you. And for this reason, it is a great responsibility on you to identify your triggers and kind of learn about them and see how they infiltrate your life, and kind of look for patterns. I'm always going to ask you to be a detective. I'm always going to ask you to do that detective work and look deep at your life and try to connect pieces together. Try to connect the details of a traumatic experience to the stimulus, so that you can understand why you're having the strong emotional or physical response, like we said earlier. That is why this is important. So I hope you learned something from this episode. Whether you came into it having somewhat of a knowledge around triggers or were completely confused by them. I hope you got something out of this episode that you can take away and can help you learn something new about yourself and about triggers. Maybe for the first time you're realizing some of your panic is originating from a trigger. Okay? That could be something very real for some of you. What we feel is real. And we just have to slow down and learn from it. It's really that simple. We have to take the time and prioritize ourselves and believe that we are worthy of understanding and we are worthy of slowing down and taking a look at our lives. Triggers are a process and they require time, so we are going to be spending more time on this topic. Join me next week and we will be digging into triggers even further, and I will even show you on a deeper level on how to use certain tools I use in my life and how you can use them in yours, okay? Take care, friends. I will see you on next week's podcast episode. Have a great week. Talk to you later. Bye. Psst. Hey girl, I gotta tell you something. Did you know your eating disorder is keeping secrets from you? Yeah, it's a total butthead. But don't worry, I'm here for you. In fact, created a freebie for you to download. It's the 4 secrets your eating disorder doesn't want you to know. And these are 4 things that I wish I would have known years ago, back when I felt like I just could not get my head above the water no matter how hard I tried. I felt like wave after wave was crashing on me. These are the secrets that have really set me free, knowing these truths about myself. And they are things your eating disorder is trying to keep from you so it can keep control over you. Don't stay in the dark, friend. The link is in the show notes. Go download it now. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. If this episode resonated with you or helped you in any way, please tell me how. Email me at hello@andreacaro.com. That's HELLO@ANDREACAROW.com. Also, if there's a specific topic around eating disorders and body image you'd like to hear an episode on, let me know. Your voice deserves to be heard, and I'm here to listen. If you'd like to hear more from me, follow me on Instagram at Andrea_Caro. Friend, please help others like you by sharing this episode and leaving me a review on Apple Podcast. Doing so will help me reach others who so desperately need this message of hope. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.